Hello and welcome to our third session of our mental health series webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We will have the next voice that you will hear will be from our illustrious chapter president of the Atlanta Suburban Alumni Chapter, Miss LaShondra Little.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar series on mental health. As we know, this pandemic has hit everyone very hard in many different ways, in many different capacities. And so we really wanted to make sure this year that we put a series out there that really would benefit the community on a taboo topic, because we know in our community, oftentimes we don't talk about mental health a lot, and really the ease of actually saying it's okay to seek professional help, to seek counseling. Yes, I know we have our religion. Yes, I know we have Jesus, but he has put mental health professionals in place that can really help everyone through this time. And so tonight's topic is going to be on grief and loss, and it does not have to be from the pandemic or from COVID, but just in general about grief and loss. And so we have two great professionals with us tonight that's going to really dive in and talk about these talk about these topics, and really talk about how we can cope and what things and resources we can have in place to really support us during this time, to ensure that we're all taking care of not only our physical but our mental health. And so I do hope you all enjoy. I hope you all take notes. There is definitely, as you're listening to the session, if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to make sure we get those answered. We're doing our mental health series every third Monday. And so this is the one for January, but we look forward to seeing you all again in February as we continue to make sure we're strengthening our mental health this year. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nadia Barnett, who is going to moderate tonight's session and to really let everyone know what's going to happen tonight. So again, take notes, don't be afraid to ask questions, and really consider this a safe space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, Stora Little. Now I am going to introduce our speakers, our panelists for tonight. And once I finish introducing our panelists, we will have our panelists will begin their presentation. So I'm going to start with Mrs. Tammy Brown. She is a New York State native who began her journey in the behavioral health field in 2002. She possesses more than 15 years of combined experience in advocacy, community and stakeholder engagement, program design, and implementation. She attended St. John Fisher College, where she earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree in criminology and criminal justice, followed by her Master's of Science degree in mental health counseling. While in New York, Tammy served in various roles, including mental health, chemical dependency as a counselor and a social worker. She and her family relocated to the Atlanta, Georgia area in 2007. At that time, Tammy began serving families and communities as a family intervention specialist on an intensive family intervention team designed to improve family functioning by clinically stabilizing the living arrangement, promoting reunification or prevention of the utilization of out of the home placement for at risk children who have behavioral needs. Tammy has also worked for several behavioral health community and state providers and has served in such roles as clinical director, home health clinician, inpatient and outpatient utilization manager, clinical assessor, and psychotherapist. She has considerable experience leading project development and care integration activities for improving the quality of care. Tammy's current role is Senior Behavioral Health Program Manager at WellCare Health Plans, where she serves on a team responsible for the behavioral health operations for the state of Georgia. She has experience in various healthcare settings, including working with multiple disciplinary teams and collaborations with multiple agencies, such as the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, the Georgia Department of Community Health, and several community partners. Tammy is a national dual certified mental health first aid instructor through the National Council for Behavioral Health. Tammy has given back to the community as a volunteer for a number of good causes. She successfully serves on various committees and work groups for behavioral health, substance use disorder, and social determinants of health. She is an advocate for peer support services, and she proudly holds an active seat on the National Alliance on Mental Health Board of Directors for the state of Georgia. Tammy's passion is advocating on the behalf of all individuals and families and behavioral health needs and educating the community on the importance of mental health awareness, integrated healthcare, and eliminating the stigma. Our next panelist is Miss S. Candy Winfield, who is a licensed professional counselor, a national certified counselor, a distant credentialed counselor, and has been in the field for over 20 years. She has a master's in clinical psychology and completed graduate work at Richmond University, where she studied the integration of psychology and theology and received a diploma in Christian counseling. She has had extensive experience in working with families in crisis and stabilizing those families as they deal with issues of substance use, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. She is also astute in working with couples, addressing communication issues, infidelity, broken trust, and bringing couples out of the destructive tit for tat cycle. She is a skilled trainer, lecturer, and workshop presenter and received a certificate of completion from the Les Brown Speaker Development Workshop. Candy has presented for the Georgia Department of Human Resources, the Adult Protective Services Healthcare, the Department of Family and Children Services, AT&T, and a number of ministries. In addition, she is credentialed as a facilitator for the Prepare Enrichment Program, the a pre-marital and marital curriculum plan. In addition, she's studying to be part of the Integrative Medicine Mental Health Group. She has provided on-site counseling services to church members, crisis intervention services, a conference speaker and workshop presented on topics such as covenant relationships, parenting, forgiveness, boundaries, and facilitated various groups and therapeutic book studies. Candy has also presented to ministries on sensitive topics such as domestic violence, substance abuse, and suicide. She has developed and created innovative services such as the Intensive Couple Unification Program, where she works with couples intensely for 2 to 4 hours to break them out of their destructive habits and cycles to prepare them to be able to be more effective. She's also a developer of the Be a Queen therapeutic workshop, which is based on the book Queenology. In addition, her successful women's group, Sister Circle for Queens, has addressed topics and unique issues related to women, moving them from self-defeating to self-empowerment, and served hundreds of women through that program. Presently, Candy works full-time in her private practice known as Suddenly Professional Counseling and Consulting right here in the Atlanta area. She works with individuals, men, women, addressing family of origin issues, interpersonal issues, as well as family therapy. Thank you so much for both of you being here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Tammy Brown to begin her presentation.
Thank you so much, Nadia. I hope everyone can hear me. Before I get started, I would just like to say briefly to thank you to all of the organizers who put this together and who invited me tonight to let me come share some of my expertise with you all. And with the other expert panelists that we have here tonight, I'm pleased to be presenting with her. And then also thank you to those of you who decided to take time out of your calendars tonight to join us. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time. So let's go ahead and get into this Mental Health Monday topic tonight is with grief and loss. And my name is Tammy Brown. I am an LPC. That's a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Georgia. All right, so I definitely wanted to get you started with some brief definitions. Most of us probably have a general idea of what grief and loss is, but just to make sure we had some context, we wanted to include the definitions of grief and loss. So, grief is the response to loss, particularly to the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. And loss is the action or state of not having or keeping something anymore. So if you take a good look at the depiction that we have here, um, simply put, this is how we would like grief to work, right? This is how we would like life to look. We want things to flow very smoothly for us. It helps. It helps reduce the pain that we may have. If things flow from A to B very smoothly, then we may be able to overstep some of those emotions that we don't necessarily want to face. But unfortunately, that is not how life works, and that is not how grief looks. Grief looks actually a lot like what we see here, which is this like scrambled ball of yarn. But it eventually will work out to be a straight line. We just have to do some work to get through the process. All right, so 5 stages of grief. Some of you may be familiar with the 5 stages of grief here. One thing that we definitely want to note is that these stages of grief, folks may not necessarily experience all 5 stages, right? Folks experience grief and life and loss differently. Grief and loss is as unique to each individual as our fingerprints. So that's just something that we want to keep in mind. So the 5 stages that we have here are denial, we have anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So you just want to take a second to look at some of the highlights here for all of these 5 stages. And again, some folks may not experience all of these stages. Some folks may bounce from one stage to the next. I may go back and forth between bargaining and anger. Some people may not experience the anger piece. Eventually, we do get, for the most part, to acceptance. It may take some individuals a little bit longer to get to the acceptance piece than the other. Another highlight that I would like to point out is though, conventionally, grief, when we think about grief, we think about an emotional response to loss, but sometimes we don't necessarily consider any of the other aspects. So there's the physical aspect, cognitive, behavioral. There's the social part of grief. You know, we might withdraw. We may not get enjoyment from the things that we used to enjoy at one point. There's a cultural piece to it. There's spiritual. There's philosophical. So there are several different dimensions when it comes to grief and loss. So we just want to keep that in mind. And I ask for you all to please take notes. I'm going to go through these slides as quickly as possible so I can stay on time. But with that being said, though, there's plenty of time for Q&A. So if I'm moving too fast through these slides, or if you have a question about something that I've said, please go ahead and write that down or put it in the Q&A, and then I will definitely address it when we get to the Q&A portion. Okay. Knowing what to expect. Here are some signs and symptoms that I wanted to jot down for you all. And again, everybody is not going to experience the same signs and symptoms. It depends on the individual. So, denial, disbelief, confusion, shock, sadness, yearning. These are just some dot points that I highlighted. All of these are completely within normal limits when you think about a human that's going through grief and loss, whether that's if you lose a loved one or someone you know, housing, employment, friendship, any of those sorts of things. So we all experience our own signs and symptoms very differently. You know, what we want to pay attention to, particularly if we are experiencing things that may not be within normal limits. If we become abusive, if we're taking things out a little bit more angry than we used to be, if we're drinking a little bit more heavily or using any other sort of drugs for that matter, if we're neglecting our responsibility, showing up for work late repeatedly, if there's a pattern going on there, that's things that we definitely want to pay attention to. So again, these feelings are normal and common reactions to loss. You may not be prepared for the intensity and duration of your emotions or how swiftly your moods may change. And that's something key to take on, because sometimes when loss happens, we don't know. It's nice when we do get a heads up. And then sometimes, even when we do have a heads up, we don't know how it's going to hit us. We don't know how long the grief and loss is going to last. We don't know how intense it's going to be. So we have to just make sure we pay attention to the symptoms and signs that we experience from that, so we can take care of ourselves and take care of our loved ones. Be assured that these feelings are healthy and appropriate and will help you to come to terms with your loss. And again, we want to pay attention to those healthy signs and symptoms. We also want to pay attention to signs and symptoms that may not be healthy and can be rather hopeful. All right, I wanted to definitely highlight childhood grief. Grief looks different in all people, right? So, childhood grief is going to look different from adult grief, and it's going to look different from elderly grief. Elderly people, they grieve a little differently than us, well, in middle-aged folks, and then they also grieve a little bit differently from childhood grief. But let's take a look here at these data points that are here, and just see if there's anything that stands out to you, anything that stands out in particular, anything that catches your attention. 1 in 7 people will lose a loved one by the age of 20. Probably all of us that are on the call tonight have experienced some form of loss in one way or another. If we don't pay close attention to how we are processing our loss and our grief, it could be detrimental depending on how we handle it, how our behaviors are. So we just take a look at that highlight. If not properly supported, 19% of youth show serious problems within 1 year. 21 will show serious problems after 2 years. And this is for substance use disorder, any sort of alcohol or marijuana or anything like that. 85% of youth exhibit angry outbursts, increased worry, depression, trouble sleeping after a loss. When you think about some younger kids, they experience bedwetting. When you have really young children, they don't understand how to say, I'm depressed, I'm grieving right now, I lost somebody that's very close to me. They don't know how to do that. So they may start just doing other things, and we may not be able to understand why. Um, and the key is just to really be patient with that young person, to really be patient with anyone for that matter, if they've experienced any sort of grief or loss. All right, the impact of COVID-19 on grief. Well, I'm pretty sure that many of you can probably think of some ways that COVID has impacted those that um, grief and loss, for most folks. So when you think about all of the people that have lost their lives, their loved ones, when you think about people that have lost their homes because their finances are impacted by what's going on with COVID, they have lost employment. All of this has a big impact on not only that one person, but it has an impact on their loved ones. It has an impact on people that are around them immediately. So what I wanted to point out specifically is stress, depression, substance use disorder when it comes to grief, loss, grievings. According to a new research released, and this was in mid last year. I think this research came out in June or July of last year. But there's expected to be an additional 75,000 deaths from alcohol and drug misuse and suicide. So, and this is just what we're projecting. There's going to be more because folks are having a tough time dealing with what's going on. And sometimes some individuals, um, we experience things differently, right? So there are some people who are kind of soaring through everything that's going on with COVID-19, and more power to them. They may not necessarily understand the significant psychological impact of folks that are not able to smooth sail as easily. So it's really important for us to be very patient with people who are having a challenge. with moving through COVID-19, with not understanding what's going on. Folks are sheltering in place. We're having to be more at home with our family that, may get on a nerve or two from time to time. We're not able to move around as freely and as openly as possible. We're home, the kids are home more. We're having to be more creative with our children. They're not able to hang with their friends like they used to. Everything is virtual now. So, just understanding that, not being able to have that physical touch with people that we care about, that affects folks. And people are drinking more. We're getting more statistics on first time reports of depression, first time reports of anxiety. Those numbers are going up. Suicide has increased. Suicide is already high. Suicide is already one of the top 10 reasons for death in the United States. And in the state of Georgia, it's the second cause of death for our children and adolescents. So I don't want that to go over anyone's head. That's something that if you don't leave here with anything else tonight, leave here with that. Our children are dying roughly between the ages 10 and 11 up until maybe around age 23. That's the age range. Death by suicide is number 2 in the state of Georgia for those individuals. COVID has made it worse. So we want to pay close attention to our young people. Nearly twice as many individuals die by suicide in Georgia annually compared to homicide. That is huge. Every 7 hours, one person in Georgia dies by suicide. So we really have to start paying attention to what is going on with our young people, what's going on with our family members, what's going on with, our elderly population. It is not normal for grandma and grandpa to I don't want to say it's not normal, but don't expect if grandma and grandpa are depressed, that's just a part of life and we can't do anything about it. We can do something about it. Grandma and grandpa can get help. Grandma and grandpa do not necessarily have to be depressed just like no one else has to. They can seek treatment and get treatment just like anyone else. So we have to be very careful. We have to take care of our elderly. Do not let them sit on that porch in that rocking chair and just rock their lives away. There's something that we can do to help our elderly. And at the bottom of this screen here, you'll see, or this slide rather, you'll see among essential and non-essential workers, and this is for adults reporting mental distress and substance use. So you'll just see here, this data outlines the mental health distress that's been reported as a result of COVID specifically for the state of Georgia. When should I talk to someone? This is a very important question. So there is a, within normal limits, I like to use that terminology, within normal limits, there's grief and loss that is a part of life. As I mentioned earlier, we have to be very careful to pay attention for symptoms and behaviors that may not be healthy, or something that's existing a little bit longer than we would like it to, and it's affecting our livelihood, right? So persistent symptoms for more than 2 weeks. So thoughts of suicide, if there's crying spells, loss of hope or a future, increased substance use, loss of appetite. I should have included physical abuse here. Physical abuse. People are, sometimes people are extremely angry when loss and grief happens. And unfortunately, that individual may take it out on a spouse or a child or another loved one. So, we want to highlight that as well. Loss of things that you used to get gratification from. Difficulty concentrating at work or school. Difficulty with your usual daily activities. So I just highlighted a few here. There are several more things that I can add here. The key is if you feel yourself or you feel that a loved one may be grieving a little bit longer, I don't want to say longer because it is individualized. If you notice that some symptoms and behaviors are out of the ordinary for this individual for an extended amount of time, it may be a good idea to talk to that person so they can, both of you can reach out to a professional, get some professional advice or direction. Professionals who can help. This is not all individuals who can help. These are professionals who can help. Usually when I put this slide up, one of the first things that folks say is, well, what about the preacher? What about the church? All of those people can help in their respective roles. But for purposes of this presentation, I'm highlighting professionals who can help here. So if we're talking about mental health concerns, there's your medical doctor. So there's your pediatricians, there's your PCPs, your primary care practitioners, your family doctors. These are the folks that we go to once or twice a year to make sure that we're healthy. You have your advanced practitioner nurses, your psychologists, your social workers. Many of us may be familiar with some of these terms. Your crisis support specialists, substance use professionals, certified peer specialists. And for those of you who may not be familiar with certified peer specialists, certified peers are individuals who have lived experience. So they have either a diagnosis, a behavioral health, a mental health diagnosis, or a substance use disorder diagnosis, or both. These people are often on treatment teams, just like anybody else. They have a role to play. So often they are on treatment teams with medical doctors, with licensed clinicians, because it's different. They are able to connect with an individual that's experiencing grief and loss differently than some other professionals are. Sometimes we get comfort knowing that a person has a similar experience that we had, and we may be able to open up a little bit more to a person that has lived in similar shoes, not the exact shoes, but similar shoes. So that's where your certified peer specialist comes in at. Types of professional treatment. So you can probably think of some types of professional treatment that we may have heard about from family, friends, ourselves, something that we may have seen on TV. You can go ahead and just get all of those up there. I think I have like 4 or 5 types of professional treatment. So you have individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy, medication, and rehabilitation programs. So individual therapy is one-on-one. Myself as a clinician with an individual who could use some assistance with processing their grief and loss. There's family therapy. Sometimes families may not understand how come Tammy has not processed what's happened with this loss that happened a year ago. Why is this person still stuck in this place? So sometimes we want to bring those family members in to kind of help them understand, first of all, to teach them different ways to support their loved one who is still stuck in that place, and to help them understand how the process works for grief and loss and how it's individualized for other folks. Group therapy, it's anything that you can think of, like a support group. Sometimes it's a clinical group where therapy takes place. Sometimes it's a skills group. So again, everyone that's in this group have experienced some sort of grief or loss. And, those individuals in that group, they support each other. Of course, there's medication. At times when we've tried other sorts of treatments that may not have been as successful, sometimes medication is necessary, and then it's recommended for medication as well, and completely up to that individual if they want to move forward with the recommended medication. And then lastly, there are rehabilitation programs. Self-care and helping others. All right, so we cannot help anyone else if we do not help ourselves. If we are experiencing grief and loss ourselves, one thing that we want to do is, speak nicely to ourselves. Speak nicely to ourselves, just like we would speak nicely to a friend. Sometimes guilt is associated with grief and loss, even if there's no reason for us to feel guilty. But unfortunately, when we're experiencing grief and loss, for some of us, we're not rational at times. So, just speaking nicely to ourselves, allowing ourselves some time to heal, talk to someone that we trust, remove ourselves from unhealthy situations, unhealthy conversations, or unhealthy media, and recognize the signs of worsening symptoms. Recognize when we need to take a step back and say, hey, I may need to talk to someone about this. I might need to call my doctor and let them know what's going on and see if I can get a referral to a behavioral health professional, or just calling a behavioral health professional outright. Helping others. We want to listen. That's key. Listen, not necessarily offering feedback or advice, but just listen. Sometimes folks just want us to sit there and listen. Have honest conversations. allow that person time to heal and process, give resources, and give support as needed. Hope. This is one of the key factors when it comes to grief and loss. When we are working with our loved ones, or I don't want to say working, when we are assisting, providing support to our loved ones, family, friends, colleagues, we definitely want to offer hope. But what we don't want to do is minimize what they're feeling. We don't want to assume anything. We don't want to tell them we know exactly what they're going through, because we don't. We may have a similar experience, but we don't know exactly what they're going through. But just offer hope, and offering hope, offering supportive words, supportive expressions, supportive gestures. Can I bring you dinner, tonight? Can I watch the kids? Can I, just something, offering some sort of hope, letting them know that you are there for them when they are ready. And then recognizing that some folks may not be ready. It may take a while for them to be ready. And that's okay. But just letting them know that you are there for them when they are at that point. Okay, these next few slides I'm going to go through very quickly because I think I may have gone over my time. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, I highlight this in every talk that I do because it's very important. As I mentioned to you, death in the United States is in the top 10 for adults, and it's number 2 for our children and adolescents. Hopefully you have either a pen or you have your phones out so you're taking a screenshot. This is the emergency contact information for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's Spanish, there's TTY, there's other languages as well. There's also a crisis line, which is the same, goes to the same organization. Younger folks, they may not like to talk, they may want to text. So please take this number down. You could save a life. Put this number in your phones. These are some local resources and supports, national and local, actually. So the Georgia Crisis and Access Line, I'm not going to go through all of them, so hopefully you have your phones out, but specifically for the state of Georgia, we have GCAL, the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. This is, again, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. This is for any sort of emergencies when it comes to behavioral health and substance use disorder. So you can call this number at any given time. Typically, when folks think of GCAL, they think of folks that are having a behavioral health crisis, which is absolutely true. But you can also call GCAL just to ask questions and to get recommendations on behavioral health providers that are in your area. So if I live in Cobb County and I may not be abreast of what's going on in the behavioral health world, but I may need some help myself, or a family or a loved one may need some help, I can call GCAL and say, hey, I'm in Cobb County. Can you give me some information for some behavioral health professionals out here? And I just have some other highlights there too. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Depression Hotline, Addiction, Self-Harm, Eating Disorder, Crisis Text Line, Veterans Crisis, Postpartum Helpline, and the Mental Health Consumer Network, where you have your peer support specialist there. Georgia COVID Emotional Support Line. This is for any and everybody. You do not need to have insurance. You don't need to necessarily live in the state of Georgia. But this is designed specifically for Georgians. There is a person on the line that's either a behavioral health professional, a licensed behavioral health professional, or they have been trained in mental health first aid like I am. I'm dually certified. You can call this number anytime up until 11 o'clock p.m. And they are here to provide emotional support. They are not there to provide therapy for you, but they will provide emotional support. And if you need to get linked to any sort of clinical treatment, if you like a therapist, they are there to share that information too. They can also link you directly to GCAL, and then they also provide other supports as needed. So if you're looking for information on unemployment or housing assistance and things of that nature, the Georgia COVID Emotional Support Line provides that information as well. And I think this is the last slide. These are some references and resources Behavioral health, again, this is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. There's a lot of great resources there for loss survivors, families that have lost loved ones, survivors, that have attempted suicide, but they have survived. There's a lot of information there. The National Council for Behavioral Health. Here locally, the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, Mental Health First Aid, GCAL, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, proud board director here, board of directors. Mental Health America of Georgia, they have a ton of resources for children and adolescents. And then lastly, the Still Standing Alliance, and this is for domestic violence individuals. So these are some highlights. I have tons more of resources. I know tonight's talk was about grief and loss. And so hopefully I've shared enough information with you. If not, I'm sure the next panelist will go ahead and give some information as well. But in terms of behavioral health, if there's anything outside of grief and loss that you have any questions about, please feel free to reach out to me for anything that's related to behavioral health and substance use disorder.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tammy Brown. I appreciate all that you have provided. You've given us a wealth of information, and I want you all to turn your page over because we have some more coming to you from Ms. Candy Winfield, and I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to thank the Atlanta Suburban Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta for this opportunity to participate in your Mental Health Monday. And we can go to the first slide. So for a few moments, I would like to talk about loss and grief and talk about grieving as the price of loving. You can stay on the first slide. Back to the first slide. And again, talk about grieving as the price of loving. And think about that for a moment. That grieving is the price we pay for loving. When we lose someone, our feelings don't necessarily stop because they have died. And when someone transitions, we don't stop loving them. What happens is that our love becomes grief. And it's necessary to grieve the loss because that's what allows us to restore and come to a new normal. So often, particularly as women, we're socialized to be strong, to take care of others, to make sure everyone's needs are met. And sometimes we do that at the sacrifice of our own needs. Next slide, please. So know that grieving is actually the process that God gave us to deal with loss and to process loss. And so it's necessary. And oftentimes what happens, because we are caregivers and we are nurturers, we spend a lot of time, again, focusing on others, and we don't even give ourselves permission to grieve. And so one of the things that complicates grief and the bereavement process is that often we don't do just that. We don't give ourselves permission to grieve. We feel we have to be strong, we have to hold up, we don't have time, quote unquote, to have a breakdown or to grieve. And so our grief becomes complicated. But know that grieving starts when you decide, I am going to grieve my loss. Next slide, please. And know that grieving is not necessarily linear. Even though there are stages to grief, you don't necessarily go through those stages in order. Grieving is kind of like a back and forth process, as you see on the screen. Sometimes it can be 5 years later and you think you have grieved, and then you might hear a song or you might even smell a smell, and it can trigger an intense grief reaction and you feel like it just happened yesterday. What is important about grief is that you continue moving through your grief and that you don't get stuck. When you get stuck in your grief, that is when it becomes unhealthy. So know that it is a dynamic process that you just kind of have to move through. And as Tammy stated in her presentation, that there is no time limit and that grief for every person is individual. So no one can say it's been 5 years or it's been a year and you're still feeling that. So again, it is as unique as you are, and you have to take your time and grieve the way you need to grieve. But what is important is that you are moving through the grief and you're not getting stuck in your grief. Next slide, please. All grief is not the same. And remember, I said grief is the process, and grieving is the process we have to deal with loss. And so, of course, when we lose a loved one, we grieve. But there are other types of losses that we have to grieve as well. For instance, the loss of a beloved job or a home, or even divorce creates a grief process, because there's a significant loss in a divorce. And not only are we grieving the person or the job or the home, but we also grieve what it represented to us. For instance, a job gives us a role or an identity. It gives us status. It gives us stability, sometimes an achievement even. And so those are things also that we grieve. And oftentimes when we have a hard time and we can't move through it, it's because we really haven't identified what it is that I need to grieve. And so in grief and in loss, you also have to identify, what is this loss representing to me? Even a person, when we go back to losing a person, think of a parent. When you lose a parent, you have now lost someone who has been there your entire life. And you don't know life without them. And now all of a sudden, sometimes they're gone. And so now you have to navigate, what is my life going to be like without someone who has been there my entire life? That person your parent sometimes is your cheerleader, is your support person. They play many, many roles in your life. And each of those roles, you grieve. And you have to acknowledge that that's what this person means to me. And that's why sometimes a parent or the loss of a parent can be so devastating, whereas a loss of a friend that you grew up with that you haven't seen in 10 or 15 years isn't as devastating. So again, it's the roles and what that person represents and who they are, the type of relationship that you have with whatever you have lost, that makes a big difference as well. Another type of loss is, say, for instance, physical health, the loss of a limb or the loss of sight. That also creates a grief process. And in an instance like that, you may be grieving your independence, because now you may be dependent on someone. If, for instance, you've lost your sight or your hearing, your self-image, your self-confidence, and even self-esteem. And so again, all grief is not the same. And when you're grieving, sometimes again, it becomes hard because you're not able to pinpoint, what is it that I'm feeling? Why do I feel so bad? So naming it, identifying what the loss represents, kind of helps you move through your grief. Next slide, please. And with this slide, I say that grief is the form that love takes when someone dies. And on this slide, I've kind of divided it up in 3 parts: the past, the living, and then the present. And I call the living, or the middle part, the messy middle. And on the messy middle, the 3 parts, we have 3 arrows. And the middle arrow, it says it's healthy to go back and forth. And so there's a point on each end of the arrow, meaning that as you are grieving, particularly in a new loss, you're going to spend time in the past. You're going to be reminiscing. You're going to be thinking of memories. You're going to be wishing that person was there. And it's healthy sometimes to go to the past, but you can't live in the past. You have to kind of come back. At the bottom, I have an arrow, and you're going back to the past, but now you're again recognizing and kind of identifying those secondary losses that I just talked about, the roles that that person played in your life. When you think about a husband and losing a significant other, that person might be your protector, your provider, your chauffeur. That person is many, many things. And now you're realizing all of these things that were attached to that person, not just the person, but again, who they represented, the roles they played in your life, the significance they had in your life. And all of that is part of your grief process. In the past, again, you go there, but you can't live there. When you get stuck living in the past, as you can kind of see in that lower left-hand corner is a hole. And when you live too long, to stay too much in the past, you feel like you fall into this hole that you can't get out of. So you have to come back to the living. And eventually, there's an arrow that points to the present. And this is the time where you can acknowledge and recognize that your loved one is gone. This is where you have to spend the majority of your time. And in the present, you get to the new normal. And the new normal is life without your loved one. And as we have said, there is no time frame for when you get to accepting the new normal. That is a process that takes time. And what is important is that you are moving through it and that you don't get stuck. The next slide, please. So I want to give you some practical applications for grieving, because sometimes you hear, well, how do you grieve? And what is grief? How do I know I'm grieving? One of the things, particularly when people come in and they've had a hard time grieving and they are stuck, so to speak, I ask them to create a container. And what I mean by that is that when you are having a hard time grieving, what happens and kind of how it looks is that you're always sad. You can hear a song or think of something, and all of this emotion comes out. It can sometimes be at inappropriate times and inappropriate places. You can be embarrassed by it, but it just feels like I am just in this bad space all the time. And what I mean by creating a container is that you set aside a time and a place where you go in, and that becomes your place to really grieve. And you do it sometimes daily if you need to. And in that space, you put something that's very, very comforting for you, whether it's a blanket, whether it is your chair or your kitchen table, someplace that is soothing and comfortable for you. And when you go into that time and into that space, that is where you think of your loved one. You may journal, you may look at pictures, you may write a letter. Sometimes it's good to just write a letter to your loved one. It can be a goodbye letter, or it can just be what you need to say in that moment in time. But in that container and in that space is where you allow yourself to grieve. And then when you come out of that space, that's when you know, okay, I've got to go and handle the demands of the time, of the day, of where I am right now. And when something comes up, you make a note of it. Okay, when I get back to my container, I got to remember to think about that. I got to remember to write about that. I got to remember to journal about that. But you kind of create this space that allows you, again, to move through your grief. But when you come out of that, you can still continue, again, to meet the demands of the day. Another exercise is create a collage, pictures, words that are reflective of your loved one that you can kind of look at and kind of have a place, and again, a space that is comforting and soothing to you. Read greeting cards. Sometimes your loved one may have sent cards or wrote letters. And again, using that as a way to kind of stay connected, but also to process your grief. Remember to live one day at a time as you're grieving. Many times you become overwhelmed because you're thinking about Christmas, or you're thinking about, what's going to happen 6 months from now. Stay in the present moment and handle the present moment and live one day at a time. Make sure that you have a strong and sensitive support system. People who are not going to say, as our previous presenter said, oh, I know what you're feeling, I know what you've been through, but somebody who can be present with you. And sometimes that's all you need, is somebody just to be there, to hear, to talk to, somebody that you are not ashamed or feel hesitant to really express what is going on with you emotionally, how you're feeling, that you can be genuine and you can be authentic and you can cry and you can laugh, and you can grieve with with that person. Give yourself the freedom to cry. Many times, again, sometimes we're socialized not to cry, or that crying is a weakness. Crying is actually a release. And when you're grieving, you need a release. You've got to kind of get it out. And so give yourself permission to cry. Cry when you need to. I remember when my mother passed, I was in the grocery store. It was Christmas time, and I had always gone home for Christmas every Christmas. And this was the first Christmas that I wasn't going home because I didn't have a home to go to anymore. But one of the things, when I would go home, I was from a very small town. So when my mother wanted something from the store, she would tell you, can you go get me some sugar, or can you go get some butter? And I would always say, make a list. But when I was in the store, in this grocery store, it seems like every item that I looked at, I could hear her saying, go get some milk or go get some butter. And in the grocery aisle, I lost it. And I just cried. I just boo hooed. But it was such a release. And as people were looking at me, I kind of laughed, but it was such a release for me because it was Christmas. It was the first Christmas. I wasn't able to go home. And I felt so much better. And obviously, I was in a public place, but I needed that release at that moment because I could hear her voice, and it just caused me to emote in that moment. But I was okay emoting. I didn't care what people thought. I knew that at that moment I needed it. So give yourself, again, permission to grieve, to emote, to release. It's also very important to socialize. Many times, people who are grieving isolate themselves. They don't answer the phone. They don't want to talk to people, and that is not healthy. We are relational beings. Relationships are important, and we have to maintain and foster relationships and connections and community. So make sure that you are socializing, that you're staying connected to those that love you. Yeah, and you may even need to say, it's not a good day. I really don't feel like talking, but I'm so glad you called. Check on me tomorrow. Call me tomorrow. I might feel better. I might feel a little more like engaging. So stay engaged. Uh, Utilize your community of faith if you have one. Have a trustworthy and honest confidant that you can talk to. And sometimes that is a professional. That can be a therapist or your PCP, as Tammy stated in her presentation. But have someone that you can talk to, that's someone that you're staying connected to in terms of grieving. And then again, if you are practicing faith, pray. Praying is such an important way to grieve. And again, it's a release. It's unloading. It's putting that grief somewhere else, and sharing that grief with someone else. Next slide, please. In closing, I want you to remember, actually, uh, In closing, I want you to know that you have properly grieved when you don't cry because they have left, but you're able to smile because they have lived. I also want to had another slide, um, and I want to share this. It's kind of a poem, and I just like to share it with you in closing. It says, "Grief never ends, but it does change. It never goes away, but it does get better. It's a passage, not a place to stay. And grief is not a sign of weakness or a lack of faith. It is the price of loving." And remember that when we love someone, it is so important to grieve, and you are going to grieve when you love. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Candy Winfield, for that. You have definitely given us several nuggets of being able to embrace the process of grieving and how to do that. We're going to transition to our question and answer component. So if we can have both Miss Tammy Brown and Miss Candy Winfield to come back, and I will um, go ahead with our first question that we have live. So this question is for Miss Tammy Brown. Do you believe the strain of most working conditions being moved to work from home has a major impact on COVID-related suicide rates? So moving from working at home and maybe home hasn't been the best environment to
Mhm.
work in, but the strain of working at home and COVID leading to an increase in suicide rates.
Absolutely. It definitely plays a role in the increase in suicide.
Okay. All right. This question for either of you: what is the best approach for someone who has lost a loved one? What should be said?
Again, sometimes it's not so much saying something, of just being present with that person and asking, what do they need? How can I help?
Mhm.
I think sometimes we feel like we need to say something, but
Hmm.
oftentimes it's just being present. Tammy mentioned cooking a meal, um, coming and taking the kids and doing practical things,
Mhm.
more than saying something. And I think it's just being present for that individual.
And how do you be present? What can you say to someone to, one, acknowledge that you realize that they've experienced a significant loss, but two, to let them know that you are there to support them, or even that you don't even know what to say, but you're there because you love them and you want to help them through their grieving process?
So you can say just that. You can say, I love you. I'm here for you. I know that you just experienced a loss. I don't necessarily know all of the right things to say, but I want you to know that I am here for you to support you in any way that I can. And that's oftentimes the best thing to say instead of trying to figure out what's the best thing to say for people. Let's not, we have to stray away from that. It's really just letting them know, like, hey, I don't necessarily know the perfect thing to say for you in your situation, but I am here for you. I'm going to be by your side to support you the best way that I can. What is it that you need from me? How can I best support you right now in your time?
Right. Yeah, I think asking, and sometimes they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may ask, can I call you, and check on you daily? Is that going to be okay? Because I do want to be here for you. So when I call, I'm I'm calling to let you know I'm here and I'm able to do, and I want to be able to do whatever you need me to do.
Okay. I have another question here from a attendee. Uh, this attendee wrote, "My son passed away unexpectedly and tragically in October. I'm stuck in my grief. I'm in counseling and on medications. I don't sleep, eat, or function very well. My mother passed away 3 years ago, and I haven't gotten past her death. How do I continue? any suggestions on experiencing several losses in a relatively short amount of time?
I'm pretty sure both myself and Miss Winfield will probably just piggyback off of each other. You want to start us out?
Yeah, that can be so complicated because,
Mm.
again, when you have multiple losses, almost the grief from the previous loss comes back. And so you're grieving all over again. And as I said, all grief is not the same. And so when you have like a tragic loss or a sudden loss, particularly the loss of a child, is something that we don't expect to experience. And
Mhm.
so it hits us in a way that another type of loss doesn't, particularly if you think of someone elderly that dies. You kind of at some point know they're going to die. And so you have to kind of acknowledge all of that. A lot of times with the loss of a child, you're thinking about what I shoulda, coulda, woulda. And though that's not necessarily a healthy place to be, and you have to know that and not to do that for yourself. I think, as she said, she's in counseling, so I think that's awesome, and probably should be very, very helpful. And to maintain that, um, share. Sometimes when you have experienced that kind of loss, sudden and unexpected and tragic, um, you don't even know what to say. So continue to go, share, be genuine and authentic in your sessions. Say how you feel and ask for what you need. Most importantly, particularly from that support system that I mentioned.
Mhm.
Don't isolate.
Um, my condolences for the loss of your child. Um, so you've already taken some really good steps from what you said. You're already in treatment. You're seeing a counselor. I'm hoping that it's regularly. You're taking medication. Um, Continue to do those things. Continue to do those things. Try not to lose touch with your counselor, with your therapist. It's going to be very important that that person is there to help support you clinically. I'm working from home. That's my dog scratching in the background, so please excuse me for that. But yeah, please, keep in contact with your therapist. Um, Being open and honest and vulnerable with them. If you notice a change in your symptoms or behaviors, or nothing is improving or it's worsening, please be sure to verbalize that to your clinician, verbalize that to your physician that prescribed the medicine. Um, those are some really, you know, key things that you would want to take from this. And then also make sure that you're paying close attention to your physical health. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep. Make sure you're drinking enough water. Make sure you're eating the right things. These play a key role. Integrated health, integrated care is very, very key. So, attending to your physical health, attending to your behavior health, those are optimal. So,
Great. And thank you for that. And you both touched on the next question related to women who experience or struggle with the loss of miscarriage or loss of a baby due to miscarriage or a stillbirth, and that process of grieving, and how would they, what would be something that you'd recommend that they do?
I would recommend PSI Georgia Postpartum Support International, the Georgia chapter. So there's a Georgia chapter here, and they really cater to pregnant moms, new moms, and including moms that have lost children. So I would probably start
Mhm.
there because they are very specialized. So she can go to this individual can go to any sort of clinician. This is what we're trained to do. Miss Renfrey, myself. I hope I didn't butcher your name. I can't see it clearly on my screen here. But if you can find somebody that caters to specifically what you need, that's a whole different type of support because they have support groups. So they have support groups for moms that have lost children and stillbirths and things of that nature. So that's PSP P as in postpartum Support International Georgia. And I'll put the website in the chat.
Thank you very much. Our next question is related to COVID. How do you support during COVID in more intimate ways, in reference to someone that either has passed from COVID, where there may be some anxieties about being around people that maybe they were in contact with, and supporting family members that are dealing with that, even experiencing funerals during this time? Any suggestion on supporting someone who's going through a loss during this time of COVID?
That's a tough one because, as you said, there's typically going to be anxiety around contact.
Mhm.
And so you do have to be very, very careful in terms of how we normally comfort and take care of each other in a time of bereavement. You know, all of those things have kind of been taken away. Even the ritual has been taken away. So utilizing technology, the telephone, of course,
Mhm.
but being mindful that, yes, it might be some anxiety around close physical contact. We can't even hug anymore the way that we used to. And so a lot of what we would normally do in a time like that is no longer available. So we do have to kind of be creative. We have to be sensitive to the needs of the person, especially when the death has been around COVID. I think one of the things that, in terms of clients that I have had that have lost someone, is people asking questions about it. How did they get it? And where were they at? And, did anybody else? I think that can be very, very insensitive and trigger anger, but also, it just hurts. And so being mindful of, again, what you say. And so sometimes questioning around COVID, because we're all curious, we all want to know, but it's just a really inappropriate time and inappropriate to ask questions around COVID deaths, how it happened and where did they acquire it and those sort of things. And people do that. And the loved ones are just, it just hurts. And so
Yeah.
being mindful of that.
And really quickly related to COVID, the loss, maybe as an extrovert, the loss of having contact with individuals, like you may have, you thrived off of contact with others, and now you may live alone, and now you're even more lonely because of the loss of just the physical contact, the loss of or the limiting factors of the level of engagement that you have. How do you deal with you live alone and COVID is really making things very lonely for you?
And sometimes it's easier said than done, but really taking advantage of all of the free, um, not necessarily social media, but all of the free live webinars and live groups and live interactions. There's been a lot of organizations, companies, agencies that know that it's tough right now for some folks because everyone can't get that physical touch. And it may be even, I'm thinking about in urban areas, but even considering the rural areas, they may have it even worse. Their Wi-Fi may not even be up. So, how do they, um, get to experience any sort of this, right? But for those that are able, just taking advantage of all of the free webinars that are there. There's so many support groups. There's so many free exercise, free cooking classes, free this, free that. It's so much out here right now that folks do not have to pay for because of what's going on with COVID. And, it's an effort to help keep folks in touch with reality, especially for those that are uncomfortable for leaving their homes, because some people can leave their homes. We have to follow the CDC guidelines. You know, we have to make sure we're masked up, we're washing our hands, we're using sanitizer, we're 6 feet apart. And that works for some folks, but some people are just not there yet. Some folks are not comfortable there yet. So, you know, just making sure, or at least extending the resources to them. Anything that they can do online. If they can, you know, what my family started to do is we started to have monthly family, you know, meetings and things like that. And you know, we haven't seen, some of us haven't seen each other in a long time, but since COVID happened, now we're on Zoom playing games and things of that sort. And then I also, you know, recommend that folks take advantage of the outside time that they can. So you don't necessarily have to go around people, but if you can get outside and just walk around your community for 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that creates a whole different set of endorphins that goes off in your head. Your brain starts to function, you start to think better. It also stimulates your physical health as well. So you're working on both your physical health, your behavioral health. So those would be some of the recommendations that I would have for that.
Thank you. We have four more questions. And I want to definitely try to squeeze them in. So the next one is, experiencing the loss of a loved one due to suicide presents another level of grief and guilt. What suggestions do you have for both the guilt and the grief from this type of loss?
Counseling helps a lot because, yes, you do experience guilt, a lot of shoulda, coulda, woulda processing that needs to be done. That kind of, if you just stay in your head, it's just going to exacerbate. And so I would recommend counseling in a situation like that. Um, because that's such a hard, that's, you know, again, that's a tragic loss, it's a sudden loss. And you need help kind of processing your grief through that.
Okay, thank you. The next question, could please speak to how the 5 stages of grief may be related to the loss of cherished items like family heirlooms or family pictures. Could one experience a grieving process similar to losing a loved one if they lose cherished belongings?
Absolutely. And before I answer that, I just want to go back to the suicide question. I just posted the link for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Georgia chapter. They are excellent. They are a wealth of resource, again, for those people that have attempted suicide and survived. They're an excellent resource for those folks. They're a huge resource for support for lost survivors, family, friends, loved ones. Please check out this website. There's groups, there's information, there's a huge walk that they do every year. It's called Out of the Darkness. And it tells you about the different types of suicide and how people are affected and all that. So please check that out. Yes, family heirlooms. So actually, it's interesting that this comes up because my fiance, he just experienced this not too long ago, maybe like a month ago. So one of his family members has been renting one of their family properties for a very long time, and his mother and father left some items in there, and it's been there for a long time since he was a little boy. So the stuff has been in the house probably for at least 25 years or so. So he went to the house maybe about a month or so ago and saw that a specific table was missing. He asked the cousin what happened to the table. The cousin said it was old, I threw it out. It caused all sorts of emotional stuff that went on in him. And he's not a typical emotional person, if you will, trying to get him to be more in touch with his emotions. But anyway, yeah, absolutely. You know, he started reminiscing about his mother and his father who had been passed for some time and his aunts and all of that stuff. And there was a huge emotional tie to that table. It was old, beat up, but it just is what it is. And Dr. Winfield mentioned it in her talk. You know, it doesn't matter. Sometimes if we're riding down the street, we may hear a song, or we may smell a smell that reminds us of our grandmother's peach cobbler. All of that stuff can take us back.
Thank you. We have a few more questions I would like to get to. This one is related to, as a clinician, are there tools that you can share that have helped you successfully support your clients and your own family during loss while navigating your own grieving process. So, as helping professionals who experience grief, but we still have to be in the place of supporting our clients and working with our clients, as well as our family most likely leaning on us for support through the grieving process. What can helping professionals do for themselves as they're experiencing grief?
One of the things that really helped me with the loss of my mother is that my girlfriends created a collage of pictures of her, and it was just beautiful. They were huge, and it was two of them. And I'm from Michigan, so it was in Michigan. But I actually shipped those collages home, and probably for about 2 or 3 months, I actually had one at my office on an easel, and it just helped me. And that was a way that, again, I grieved, but I also smiled when I would walk in there and look at pictures. And of course, it created memories. And so, again, just finding those things, as I said when I talked about the container, things that you can do in your container, such as looking at pictures, creating a collage, writing letters, reading books on grief, writing a poem, writing letters, goodbye letters, but just letters, many different types of activity that help with grief. So again, know that it's a process and that it's a dynamic process. So you have to do things to grieve, not just sit in it, but actually action.
Wonderful. Okay. Um, we have, so, okay. Next to the last question, as a teacher going back into the classroom, what are some of the dialogue that can be implemented with young children who have suffered a loss or are just concerned or worried about being back in the school environment in lieu of COVID and that we're still in the pandemic? What can be said to help them feel safe and secure? And I would also assume, what is something that teachers can do who also feel concerned about having to be back in the classroom? What are some things they can do with the experience of being in COVID and grieving having to get adjusted to a new life amidst the loss that we've experienced?
So, we ask a lot of our teachers. At the end of the day, our teachers are there to teach, to educate our children. I would recommend keeping it very simple. Um, just let that child know, you let your student know that you are there for them if they need you. I probably wouldn't get too much into that because that's what you have your school counselors and your school psychologists there for. I would utilize those people. um, I would definitely probably speak to the school leadership to ask them what they have in place to support us as teachers, as professionals. What do we have in place? Do you have mental health first aid? Do you have this? Who do you have coming in to train us? That sort of thing. Because we want to be careful not to burn out our teachers. We don't want to overwhelm our teachers. So, we want our teachers to be there, to provide that initial, hey, I care for you as my student. I care for you. If you need to come to me, talk to me about anything, I would do that. I probably wouldn't initiate anything as a teacher unless, there's a specific student that I see some things that's going on. That student maybe not have come to me, and I know that something is going on with that student, and I may need to pull that student to the side and have some conversation. But other than that, I would probably definitely utilize that school psychologist and that school counselor. That's what they get paid for, and those schools, they get certain money. It may not be a lot, but they do have some funding that they can, get some sort of relief for the teachers there.
I would just add, I think as a teacher, the only area that I would probably delve into is talking about the importance of the hand washing, the social distancing in the classroom. And this is how we keep ourselves safe. I don't think I'd go any further than that. As you said, there are people that are trained for that. But I would talk about how this is why we have to do the social distancing, the hand washing in the classroom as a way to stay safe.
Thank you. Okay. So last two questions that we're going to take. You both mentioned about people, loved ones that want to support someone experiencing grief, someone in the grieving process. But if I am the person who is grieving and I isolate myself because of that, I'm in that grieving process, in that stage where I want to isolate, I want to be alone. But encouraging people to talk to me creates a sense of irritation, frustration, anger. What can I do so that I don't respond in that way? Because I don't mean to be angry with the people that care about me, but I'm just still in my space of grief. And what can I do to get out of this stage or this space?
That is not necessarily, I mean, obviously, you go through different moods and stages. And I guess for that person, knowing that that's not a place, again, where you want to stay, I think that's where you fall in that hole.
Mm-hmm.
And so just acknowledging today, I don't want to be irritated, but please check on me tomorrow. Because I don't want to stay here, but this is where I am today. But can you call me tomorrow and push me a little bit if I'm still staying here? If I'm still don't want to be bothered, remind me that I need the contact, I need the connections, I need the relationships.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback off of Miss Winfield, I mean, it sounds like this person already acknowledges that they're irritable. So what I would like to add to that is, let your family know that you're okay. You're just not in the best space right now. I need my time. I will come to you when I need you, or check on me tomorrow, as Miss Winfield said. But one thing about families and people that care for you is, if you're not letting them know what's going on, and you don't have to give a long drawn out story, but if we look at you and we can tell that something is going on, and we say, "Hey, are you okay?" And you say, "I'm fine, nothing's bothering me," but clearly something is bothering you, and you're not letting us know what's going on, we're going to continue to worry. So just let us know, hey, I'm not in a good mood right now. I'll check with y'all tomorrow. I'm okay, but I just need my space right now. That little bit at least lets us know that you acknowledge something, and you're letting us know what's going on, and then we just gonna give you some space, and we'll check with you either later today or tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Our last question, the attendee wrote, I lost my line sister who was my best friend in August of 2019. It was unexpected. I have gone through many stages of grief, but still I'm feeling overwhelmed and stuck in sadness, a deep, dark sadness. I still can't talk about her without breaking down. How can I get unstuck?
I don't know if that's stuck. It sounds to me like she's just in her grief process. And as we said, there's no time limit on it. Little over a year, her best friend. Remember, I talked about when we lose someone, we also lose everything that they represent to us. And so it may be, it doesn't sound like she's stuck to me. I don't, does it sound like she's stuck to you, Tammy?
It doesn't sound like she's stuck to me, but she thinks that she's stuck. My recommendation would be to take advantage of your behavioral health professionals. We are here to help. Most insurances cover behavioral health. Even if you don't have insurance, there are plenty of resources out here for people who do not have insurance, where you can get behavioral health treatment. This is what we're here for. We're just like your PCP, but we are here to help, process your emotions. You should not have to go through this alone, and you should not have to rely on people who wish and mean you well, but they are not clinicians. They can provide you a certain level of support. But if you feel like you're stuck, and something that stuck out to me was deep and dark, I think, it may be time to call someone and just have a conversation. Is this going to be like talking to myself or Miss Winfield? We are here. We're just coaches. We're helping you um, along the path. That's it. We don't judge. We don't do any of that. We're just here to have conversation with you to help you get to where you want to be.
And I think I would add to that the crying. It's okay to cry. It's okay to speak about the loved one that you've lost and cry and experience those emotions. I think if you hold those emotions in, they're going to come out anyway. And if you want a river, you want a flood. So as both our presenters have shared, you need to give yourself permission and allow yourself to experience your own personal grieving journey, and seeking out professional help as you need to, or as recommended by those around you who love you. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the floor over to our program chair for physical and mental health, Miss Sabrina Clark.
Wow, what a powerful, informative webinar. I think we all we all feel like we've learned something. We've probably gained some insight as to even how to address certain situations, whether it's with ourselves personally or with someone else that we know that may be grieving in certain situations. I want to thank you both again for joining us this evening. Both of our panelists actually are a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate your time, your knowledge, your expertise, and your willingness to share with the community. As Nadia mentioned, I am Sabrina Clark, and I am the chairperson for our chapter's Physical and Mental Health Committee. Everyone's mental health matters, whether it's age 6 or 106. Please, 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 and I will say please again, don't allow the stigma of mental health issues to stop you from pursuing the help that you need. We are here once again on the third Monday of every month, covering just a myriad of mental health issues. And next month, the month of February, we're actually going to address toxic relationships. And so we'd be happy to have each and every one of the attendees join us again. And by all means, both to Ms. Brown and Ms. Winfield, you're certainly welcome to join us as well. It's certainly, not a bad thing to actually, have that kind of expertise, even to just, attend as an attendee in some cases. Thank you again for joining us for this month's mental health series. Please take a few minutes and complete our brief survey. We appreciate and welcome the feedback. Stay safe. See you in February, and remember, your mental health matters.
Thank you.
Nadia, I'm thinking, and you're probably going to cringe when I say this, but I kind of feel a grief and loss part 2 coming probably very soon.
Say that one more time.